Little is known about parents' actual behavior within American families before the 1930s, when empirical research on children and families had its fullest beginnings. Most of what is known about child rearing before that time comes from such sources as popular magazines, medical and religious books, journals, and biographies. These texts tended to exhort parents, almost always mothers, to behave in a particular way. Or they claimed that parents, mothers, behaved in a particular way without providing evidence that the claim was true. In addition, some authors made sweeping but undocumented generalizations about the effects of maternal, but rarely paternal, behavior. Some, for example, went so far as to place the entire burden of children's well-being in this life and the next on mothers' shoulders. In 1849, for instance, Elizabeth Hall wrote in Mother's Assistant magazine: "Yes, mothers, in a certain sense, the destiny of a redeemed world is put into your hands. It is for you to say whether your children shall be respectable and happy here and prepared for a glorious immortality, or whether they shall dishonor you, and perhaps bring your gray hairs in sorrow to the grave, and sink down themselves at last to eternal despair." Page 27. Right parenthesis. Earlier, in the 1700s, Rousseau had already proclaimed that mother's love will cure society's ills, as cited in Kagan, 1978, page 54. For more than 200 years, mother love was generally considered paramount in child development. Kagan, 1978, Stearns, 1991, Stendler, 1950, Sunley, 1955. Moreover, mothers were assumed to have nearly exclusive daily responsibility for the care of children. Fathers were seldom mentioned in the popular press before the mid-1920s, Atkinson and Blackwelder, 1993, except occasionally as breadwinners, disciplinarians, teachers, and moral preceptors. Father love was virtually unrecognized by the media. A dramatic shift occurred with respect to gender-specific parenting articles in the mid-1920s, however. To illustrate, Atkinson and Blackwelder reviewed a sample of 1,482 popular magazine articles from 1900 to 1989. They found that by the mid-1920s, gender-nonspecific parenting articles had begun to reach ascendancy over mothering articles. That is, the term parent began to supplant the term mother in most articles. It is quite possible, though, as noted by Atkinson and Blackwelder, that as women began entering the labor force in increasing numbers, popular writers found it more appropriate to use the term parenting when in fact they really meant mothering. In any case, only 16% of all articles published dealt explicitly with fathers. This percentage fluctuated little in the popular press throughout the course of the 20th century. This evidence regarding the rarity of reports about fathers and especially about father love in the popular press is supported by Elner, 1973, who reviewed every article related to child rearing for the first 6 months of 1950, 1960, and 1970 in 3 family monthly magazines: Ladies' Home Journal, Good Housekeeping, and Parents Magazine. Of the 177 articles reviewed, only 3 dealt with fathers. In these, fathers were urged to participate in the discipline of their children and in children's sex education. Beyond that, fathers were viewed as important role models for sons and as husband models for daughters. None of the articles dealt with father love. Early professional publications in child development and family studies reflect similar trends to those found in the popular press. Peterson, Becker, Helmer, Shoemaker, and Quay, 1959, for example, reviewed the professional literature on parent-child relations from 1929 to 1956. They found about 169 publications dealing with mother-child relationships, but only 7% dealing with father-child relationships. Aaron, Banter, Walder, and Lawlicht, 1961, supported this conclusion when they estimated that about 15 times as many publications dealt with mother-child relations as with father-child relations. Furthermore, they found that when information was collected about fathers, it was commonly obtained from men's wives, not from fathers themselves. Nash, 1965, argued that this tendency to obtain information about fathers from mothers, or from children, resulted from the researchers' implicit assumption that fathers themselves were inaccessible because of out-of-home economic responsibilities. It is difficult to determine from these early reviews of professional literature what percentage of the few studies that dealt with fathers also implicated father love in some way. An estimate may be made, however, from the work of Rohner and Nielsen, 1978. These authors completed a critical review of the literature dealing with parental acceptance rejection from about 1930 through 1976. In their work they found about 600 relevant studies. Of these, 108, 17%, mentioned fathers, but 70% of the latter references occurred in the 1960s and 1970s, a time when many other researchers were also recognizing fathers as significant parenting figures. Fez and Compers, 1992, for example, reviewed every article in 8 clinical and child and adolescent journals, from 1984 through 1991. The authors wanted to ascertain possible gender bias in the reporting of parental influences in child and adolescent psychopathology. They found that 48% of the articles reviewed included only mothers, whereas 1% included only fathers. However, 26% of the studies obtained and analyzed data separately for both mothers and fathers. These figures are representative of the fact that a virtual revolution has occurred since the 1960s and 1970s in the recognition of fathers, albeit only minor recognition of the influence of father love. Biller, 1974, 1981, 1993, Hansen and Bossert, 1985, 1991, Hewlett, 1992, Lamb, 1975, 1981, 1986, 1997, Mackey, 1996, Radin, 1981. We turn now to an exploration of the following question. Why has father love been so understudied for nearly a century in research on parent-child relations?